Hi everyone, I'm Darshana. So in this video, I thought of talking about another aspect of another issue in scientific method based on something a contemporary event, uh, which is the U.S. election. So presidential election. So at this point, still the court challenges are going on, judicial challenges are going on by the Trump campaign. So we don't know what will happen. um, but this is because I think that Trump campaign is uh, alleging that mass scale voter fraud happened. One allegation is that the mail-in ballots that were used due to so vast number of mail-in ballots were used compared to the previous elections, and they were, most of them were fraudulent or like vulnerable to fraud. That's what they allege. The other thing is they allege that the voting machines were vulnerable, and and so on. So there are two different arguments that are brought by the Trump campaign, and we don't know what will happen. But this is more about the polls, because we all know that the so in 2016 all the polls were wrong in predicting that Hillary would win, and even in this election, almost all the polls predicted that Trump would lose by a huge margin. Even Fox News, which is supposedly a left right wing channel, they predicted that Trump would lose in almost all the states. And but I mean, in some of the polls were wrong, because some polls, I think in Ohio and some other states, Trump won. And even in the ones that he lost based on the official counts, um, he lost by a small margin, right? It's a very tight race, not like what the polls predicted in 2016. Actually, the polls were off, or they were wrong. So in this part of the world, in Sri Lanka and India, people use astrology a lot. Astrologers predict the outcomes of elections. So there are polls as well, but I guess there's more interest in astrology during the election times. They use country charts and also charts of individual contestants to do the predictions, and sometimes it's so, sometimes it works. So anyway, but I think in the US and in the Western world, more attention is given to the polls, right? And that is the kind of scientific way of knowing the public opinion and also doing predictions. Even in Brexit, as far as I can remember, the polls were off. So why did that happen now? What was the reason for the polls being wrong? I think if you look at the Trump supporters, so they basically make two allegations. One is that they say that these media companies, these polling companies, were all biased against Trump, and they used these biased, fake or skewed polls as a marketing tool against Trump, right? Because then you think that, that would discourage the campaign and so on. There's another allegation which suggests of something more sinister. That is, they allege that the Democrats were trying to steal the election, fix the election through mail-in ballots and these questionable voting machines. So they deliberately created these fake poll numbers, so when the fraud actually happens, people would think that it's normal, right? That's the other allegation. So both these allegations are, I have seen both these allegations, and I think both of them are, it's difficult to prove them. But if you look at those allegations, those don't really point out any problem in the method, right? The method is working if you do it properly. That's what they suggest. It's just that they suggest that the people, who are doing the polls are dishonest, right? It's like when a scientist publishes fake results to get the outcome that they want to get the paper published, right? So something like that. So it's a problem with the question with the integrity, not the method. Integrity of the person who's doing the experiment. So there's another reason that is given, which is a more, which has, I think, more broader acceptance, which is that many so when you do the poll, you ask someone, you approach someone or call someone and ask whether they are going to vote for Trump or Biden. So the other argument is that most Trump supporters, they don't admit that they're going to vote for Trump because they are scared of the backlash that can create, especially if they are living in a liberal neighborhood. Other people might shun them, and if they might get fired from their jobs, or like they might have some issues at their workplace or running their business, right? Which is not unreasonable uh, fear, I guess, based on some of the things that has happened. So they basically lie in the poll, right? They don't tell the truth because to save their property or livelihood or friendships or family connections. But when they go to the polling station, nobody's watching, so they can honestly vote, right? So which is I think that seems to be a real phenomena, and I think there's a broad acceptance by both parties that can happen. So there's even a name coined for these people called closet Republicans or closet Trump supporters, like in the case of closet gay people sometime back. Now gay people are more out in the open, but sometime back they used to pretend that they are straight, right? Because of the social implications. So something like that is happening with the Trump supporters. So that is the argument, right? So now, which is certainly possible that it is happening. And if you take that particular phenomena, so that kind of highlights a weakness of the scientific method, I think, when you do experiment with conscious beings or conscious objects, because it's not like experiment that you do with, you know dropping two objects with different masses or different yeah, of different mass from the same height, right? Those objects are inanimate. But if you work with animate objects or conscious objects like human beings or even animals, because animals too can lie, I guess. I'll share a nice video of a dog that pretends to stretch when it's a puppy, actually, when it's following a cat, and the cat looks back, it pretends to doing something else, right? So it has this concept of lying. uh, so any animate or like advanced animals like dogs, or definitely humans, they have the ability to pretend, right? They can lie because they might think the implications of telling the truth might put them in trouble. So now, so I guess that we don't have a clear way of knowing whether someone is telling the truth or not when you question someone. That can have, I mean, so a poll is basically experiment where you use some kind of a method to do the sampling. You can't ask everyone, so you take a sample from different demographics, ethnic groups and all that, and then based on that you make a projection, right? uh, but even within that demographic, maybe in working class Americans or maybe in educated college graduates, because they are the ones who interact with the liberal crowd, so they might be reluctant to tell the truth. Now this can happen in like more serious experiments. Of course election is a serious business, but if you take something like maybe some controversial or like a controversial experiment, maybe you try to test whether watching pornography or different kinds of pornography affects the ability to concentrate among teenagers, maybe. So now if you try to do that using a survey, so survey is a more broad form of a poll, I guess. You have a series of questions, and surveys are used in humanities a lot, in even in more applied sciences like psychology or management. You have to use a lot of surveys, right? And so that is when you want to do experiment with animate objects, humans, to get their opinion. So you assume that they are telling the truth, but they might not be, because if you take that kind of a scenario, like when you ask these teenagers how often do you watch pornography, or what kind of pornography that you watch, so maybe they won't tell the truth, because sometimes they can get you in trouble. There can be illegal kinds of pornography as well that they're watching, or even if it is legal, they might, they might lie. So then we can't really find the truth, so to speak. It's so the reason for that is, when you ask someone something, you are actually being part of that system, because they are actually scared of you, the observer getting a certain opinion or leaking that information to third party, right? So there's sort of an observer effect in quantum mechanics, I think. um, I mean, people have proved that there's an observer effect when you deal with these quantum particles, that the observer changes the system. The mere act of observing changes, alters the system. So you can't really know, you can't really observe without altering the system. I think even in classical objects that might happen, but it's negligible. Like if you measure the pressure of a tire, you have to take some air out, but it's negligible. So you're altering the system, but it's negligible. But with quantum particles, it's significant. So I guess with even with large objects like humans, since they are conscious and animate, they can think for themselves. They are sort of an observer effect there, I guess, when you do surveys or polls, which is why they go wrong, because you are not really observing the reality. You can't really observe the reality. Yeah, when you observe them, you are being part of that system, right? um, so I guess that's sort of a limitation of the scientific method in humanities, in when you in surveys basically, or polls. And humanities use a lot of surveys, because when you work with humans, you don't have many tools to work with. So surveys are one of the key methods that are used, right? So I guess the other approach is to embrace that. So I think I have read this book by professor social science professor called Nandasena Ratnapala in Sri Lanka, who wrote a book on beggars in Sri Lanka in 70s and 80s. I think he lived as a beggar for many years, and I think his wife also left him because of that. And he basically wrote a very subjective account of that whole experience, and he revealed that it's an industry where there's a businessman who's managing all these beggars. So something like that you can't know from a survey, right? You can't ask beggars who's managing, and they will never tell you, right? But he so that's, I think, called participatory method. You being willingly being part of the system, and you write a subjective account. Of course it's a subjective account, but it can sometimes penetrate that barrier that we are putting up in surveys. I think he in the introduction or preface, I guess I remember him mentioning about his inspiration being one of the American social scientists who actually lived like a black person after injecting some injection, and literally becoming black. And so he's a white guy who lived like a black person just to get that black experience and to write about racism and all that. So that was his inspiration. Later on, he wrote another book. Nandasen Ratnapal wrote another book on prostitutes, but that wasn't very convincing, because I thought, because he's a very conservative guy, so he didn't actually sleep with the prostitutes. He just talked to them. So you can't really know, you can't really, I guess, experience that without sleeping with the prostitutes. So that wasn't that convincing, but the book on beggars was very good, right? It actually revealed many years back the things that you see in the movie Slumdog Millionaire, that in this part of the world, maybe in other parts of the world as well, but in this part of the world, beggars are like not autonomous independent people, they are actually managed by a whole enterprise, right? They are also tools of that, slaves of that. So I guess, yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. That these surveys or polls, they have this inherent limitation, because we assume that our subject is telling the truth, which can be true if it is like a trivial or not a very controversial subject. But for most of the things that really matter, those are controversial, right? So then you don't, there's observe effect, right? But you observe, you are being part of the system, so that might give you an incorrect outcome, right? So maybe using like a participatory or participative method might, even though it's a very, I mean, willingly it's a subjective, admittedly a subjective uh, way of getting knowledge, but it might reveal some of the things that the supposedly objective uh, method of surveys and polls might not reveal, right? Okay, just that's basically what I wanted to talk about today, and I'll share some of the links uh, related to what I talked about in the description box. And do share your comments and thoughts, and see you again with a similar video. Thank you.